This is a talk I gave at the Kent Regional Library, which is located outside of Seattle, on November 2nd, 2019. It is the voice recording of the talk as well as my slide share. So I hope you find it helpful. There's more information on my blog, which is wrenchinthegears.com, and the focus of this talk is education and pay for success finance.
The tech around Internet of Things and wearable technology. So I'm calling this talk When Teachers Are Avatars and the Students Are Data. And essentially that this discussion is really looking at education within the lens of how schools are being remade to feed a new type of economy that is very much driven, a data-driven economic system that is increasingly automated and in which human beings and human relationships are seen as redundant by those in power. So the little guy off on the one side is from Reasoning Mind. And I have a good friend. I think there's probably like a collection of, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 of us sprinkled across the country who are really digging into this. A lot of us are moms. And one of my friend Lynn is in Dallas. So this Reasoning Mind is a Dallas construct. It's a math AI tutoring system with ties to Russia, and its investment with a lot of the oil companies are investing in this ed tech. But the kids were getting really attached to these avatars. So I wanted to, in compliments to Lynn, open up with the Reasoning Mind avatar, because I think that is the future, that if we aren't really vocal about not wanting, that's what we're going to end up with. So at the top is Norbert Wiener, and I read that there's a book called Surveillance Valley, which it's by Yasha Levine, and I highly recommend it. It's a military history of the internet. And so it goes into great detail about the origins of the internet within defense interests and sort of US imperial interests. And Norbert Wiener was a brilliant mathematician, wunderkind. He was employed in the Second World War. He's like a human computer, and he was the early father of cybernetics and artificial intelligence. And then by the later 40s and 50s, he realized sort of what genie they had let out of the bottle and the implications of what they had created in terms of the future of automation on human society. And so as we think about education within the economy, his quote, "Let us remember that the automatic machine is the precise economic equivalent of slave labor. Any labor that competes with slave labor must accept the economic consequences of slave labor." And so as we think about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I think that's what I really hold with me. And he put himself at great risk to speak out against the thing that he had created, and was targeted as a political dissident for his views throughout his later life. So I just want to say, my goal is not to say this is all going to happen. What I can do well is say, I'm kind of a good foresight person, I guess, looking broadly across a lot of different areas and seeing things I see are red flags and how different parts could interlock down the road. And I don't know, I'm sure at some point there's maybe a small tiny group of people who are the Davos crowd that know how this is running, but I think the reality is that most people only know one part. And they don't have an occasion to really know how the other parts are coming and how the gears are like coming closer to interconnecting. So I'm not saying this is all going to definitely happen. Clearly, Norbert Wiener was very concerned in the late 50s about this, and it hasn't fully happened yet, right? So there's still time. We don't know exactly what the time frame is, and we know that people over time have always resisted these, and people are darn creative, and I have faith in their creativity to sort of take on these challenges. But I think to pretend that it's not happening or to not acknowledge have equal access to the information that those in power have puts us at an extreme disadvantage. So I'm here to sort of walk through what this is. So who am I to be doing this thing? I'm a parent. I raised up a kid through the Philadelphia public school system. They graduated in June, but we had 13 years in. So we were a crucible of ed reform, what I call ed reform 1.0, many layers of privatization. And I got involved in when they we closed 23 schools in 2013 and laid off 3,000 teachers. And then I stepped in and I'm like, this is not right. And so I started fighting, and the tool I thought I would use to fight it was standardized testing and opting out. And so I organized that for a while, and then I realized down the line that there was a planned transition to all the time testing through technology. And I realized that we had been hoodwinked, and it made me even madder. So I dug in more. And then what I realized is we're also a city of very deep poverty. And so this problem of managing people as data is not limited in any way to education. Is much more about managing human capital in dispossession across many fields, healthcare, housing, substance use, mental health treatment, like many, many aspects. It was far, far bigger than education. So my technique, the other piece is, so I work half-time, which I have the great privilege of doing, and I work in a wonderful place. It's a botanic garden. Uh-oh. So it's in with great people. And so that balances off the awful things I do on my other part of my time. And I spend like 2 or 3 days a week pulling at this thread and finding the next thing. And I do it through LinkedIn, I do it through 990 tax forms, I do it through watching World Bank videos, I do it looking at who came to which conferences, and then at each piece it opens further and further, because none of this is really hidden, none of this information I'm sharing today, like I have top clearance to get, it's just I keep tugging the thread, and my friend was like, Allison, you're like the connector. And I was like, well, it's kind of like this dog, but like I wander through this field and collect all of this stuff and then try to like pick it off and like put it in places. So a tool that I use a lot is Little Sis, and it's a crowdsourced software system where it's a database that you create files for individuals and organizations, and then you can create relationship links. So I have been doing, it's really burdensome and time consuming. You have to put a URL link to everything that you put in Little Sis. So someone can, and so a lot of times the links go dead, honestly, but if someone wanted to come back and check your, see where you got that information, they could do that. And I try to like highlight whole reports and paste it into the notes section. So even if the link is dead, that information lives there. So over 3 years, I built a really robust network of systems, and through this network of parents and colleagues, I have a good friend who's in the Bay Area who's in meetings with many of these people, and I'm able to build a network of information. And then I use these maps to try to tell stories, and sometimes they're really complicated because it's hard to know where to start and to bring people along, but that's what I do. So I kind of feel like, and I said, this is a beautiful, beautiful library, beautiful land. We drove through the countryside. We saw goats and trees. It's beautiful. It doesn't look like, for all intents and purposes, if you weren't tugging this thread, that it's a very scary place to be or live or time to live if you didn't know this. But I live in Philadelphia again. We're a city of deep poverty. We're a city with the center of the opioid crisis. I have close friends that I'm organizing with who are impacted on a daily basis by terrible things. And navigating very bureaucratic systems that are managing them. And if I didn't have those relationships, I wouldn't know many of these things that I know today. So it's being able to knit the money with people's lived experience that has really helped me. So it's almost like I live in an augmented reality world. And like my family gets so sick because like someone will go like, oh, they took money from them, and they're like, oh, could you just stop it? Like, but my world is layered with this bits of information, so it's never just the thing you see, it's the layers behind. So what I'm trying to do in this talk is to sort of say, like, we're living in this increasingly augmented reality world with this layer of information that some people have access to and some people don't. So if what I can do in this talk is sort of put the virtual, like, augmented reality lenses so that you can see some of these pieces and reflect that when bits show up in your world, that you'll be able to like see the augmented reality part and know where it plugs into this framework, that will be a good thing. So the last time I came, the focus was really very much about ed tech and contrasting what I call education reform 2.0 with 1.0, which is what I think many people who are very deep into education activism are familiar with around charters, vouchers, standardized testing, Teach for America, things that we've been fighting for a long time. But most people aren't talking about the stuff that I talk about. They're starting to, which is great. I always say, like, I'm usually writing stuff to a very small audience that's about 2 or 3 years ahead of where most people go. So I don't want to tread that ground again today, but I do, it was filmed, so if you, can you send it, what did I do with the sign-in sheet? Could you, do I have a sign-in? Oh yeah, if we could, so if you don't mind, I have a blog, it's called Wrench in the Gears. I do email blasts to folks when I have new posts. If you'd like to sign in the sign-up sheet, I will add you to one of those lists. I also have like a handy-dandy, lovely infographic card that might be a like guidepost. As I go through this talk, it talks about the intersection between education, the labor market, and social welfare services. So I'm just going to circulate those as well. But I just want to hit a couple points so we're starting from the same page. What is coming? Okay, so we're moving beyond the charters, the TFA. That was all about, like, there was certainly quite a bit of profit taking in that, and disruption, and preparing sort of the test bed for these new models. But what we're going to see in the next 5 years is very much more education as a game list, a playlist of you're interacting with videos and online resources. These are often called open education resources, and many of them are free. But what isn't free about it is there's a lot of metadata that's collected on how one interacts with online free resources. Increasing interest in gamifying experiences, because there's a lot of behavioral information that pulls out of gamification. And a really big push for neuroscience, like this idea that you're actually going to engineer people's brains, often through digital interfaces. The way in which you interact with digital technologies, it will like optimize your brain. The push towards capturing, and this is very much part of the whole child discussion, that it is, like, it's not enough to know about reading and math. We really want to know, we care about your whole child. And it sounds really good until you realize, like, to what end that they really care about my whole child. So collecting behavioral data, and increasingly mental health screening. Because we all know that it's a real concern, because schools have been constructed to really, be difficult places for kids to navigate and cause a lot of harm. But potentially the solutions that they're positing are not going to be all that great. It's not just screens. I think now people are starting to realize the concerns around screen time, and talking about it both in terms of impacting vision, impacting like social connections in classrooms. But just when people are getting used to screens, they're going to jump to wearable technology. So they're always like a couple steps ahead. So wearable tech and augmented and virtual reality are coming. Competency-based education. So competency-based education sometimes is called mastery education or proficiency-based education. Essentially, it's like you don't really get letter grades anymore. You just have sort of, the curriculum is broken down into little check boxes of skills that you acquire, and you either have them or you don't, and you check the box and move on. And it's very much suited to both using online curriculum, because they'll turn the curriculum into a bunch of check boxes and you just play the game and check the box, but also increasingly with wearable tech. That you can do a project and the wearable tech would know if you successfully completed the task at hand, and then they give you a check your box competency. So this is about removing the obligation of students to be in classrooms with teachers and students, and really that it's mediated through the tech. This is all pushing towards really early pre-professional, getting kids on a college to career pathway, and increasingly that's going to happen in out of school time environments. So this isn't, I think a lot of folks when they hear about career and technical education think like, bring back, we want SHOP, we want these things like that we used to have that were really helpful. Like we need plumbers, and we need people to fix our cars, and these are all valuable services. But what they're not realizing is that the plan isn't to bring that back within a school educational environment with professionals who are trained in developmental, who are trained as teachers and know how to work with kids. They're pushing kids out into work-based systems and getting credit that way, which is, I think, will cause lots of concerns about like deregulation and child safety. And then increasingly, as poverty impacts schools, this idea of providing wraparound services, but that I'm going to go into that more, but that is becoming a human capital investment market. And the fact that FERPA has been gutted, the data protection that it's much more fluid now, and they're really pushing parents to sign FERPA waivers to be able to get this data. That once you have these services embedded within a school context, it's much less protected than, say, receiving mental health services within a medical context. So that's really important to know. So this is the learning ecosystem model. It's important to know KnowledgeWorks is the main sort of vehicle to push this. And this is their idea of what the future of learning is. And, that it's going to be this collection of, again, playlists and out of school time, learning, and you're going to go collect your badges. ELOs, which are extended learning opportunities, sometimes expanded or enriched learning opportunities. This is being pushed by the online learning folks. It could be virtual learning, job shadows, apprenticeships, service learning, private instruction. So you can pay, for your kids' lessons, and they'll get school credit. And I know Washington actually, I guess, already has a lot of this. So, but you could go on a trip with your family and get school credit, which kind of sounds cool for the kid who can afford to like go to Europe with their family and get school credit, but it really is not an equitable way to approach education. And then the way they would keep track of all of this learning, these competencies, would be through badges. And the MacArthur Foundation has been working with Mozilla for many, many years to do these badges, and actually for a long time it was embedded at Duke, and Duke was sort of the home base, academic base for like humanities learning and badges, and those are connected to the career pathways. So these learning ecosystem models are being pushed by MacArthur through something called Collective Shift, and they're cities of LRNG, which I mean learning, but there are about 10 of them. Philly is one, Pittsburgh is one, Dallas is one, San Diego is one. Many of them are also smart cities. So the idea that the city is your classroom, which again, like, is really cool if you did it with like a teacher and like it was field trips or like, but this is just sort of the Wild West of, you know, on your own badging. And I will say, I wrote a blog post a while ago called like Navigating Whiteness, and we had an issue with a Starbucks where you know, 2 black men were accosted by the police in our local Starbucks. And so, you know, my question is, if we are pursuing this model, is knowing what we know about how society operates, what does that look like for advantaged people versus disadvantaged people? Like, what if you're a young black or brown person, high school kid with a Chromebook navigating the world as a learning ecosystem? What are the outcomes what are the protections we're gonna offer those kids in a world that's increasingly also, you know, militarized policing is part of this, and you know, the whole Epstein situation, and there's a lot of questions that people don't even know that this is the plan. So before we like baby step our way, and then they're just saying like, oh, I'm sorry, the state budget didn't pass, and there's really no option, and then, oh, I guess we'll do this in the meantime, and this is the new model, we need to be talking about it. The other piece is, I think a lot of folks are not familiar. I mean, I think generally if you say, oh, the internet, yeah, it was from the military, like, oh yeah, like the internet can't, but it's really awesome. EdTech has been this partnership of both the government, higher education, and the Defense Department. And they have been working on it a long time. There's an amazing book called The Friendly Orange Glow about the Plato system and educational technology. It's actually really fascinating to see how much of our current social media experience had its origins in the 60s at its University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So this has been coming for a long time, but it really got a big jump start in the mid-1990s, because at that point the Defense Department said, we need distance learning. You know, we have folks on naval submarines in the South Pacific and they need new software, so we need this to work. And so they scaled it for the National Guard and the Defense Department. They said, well, we just need this for all federal workers. This is the best thing. Of course, there are many tech-based interests driving this. And then they said, well, not just for government workers, this should be for everybody, for Americans, for their lifelong learning. We should just really have this technology for American lifelong learning. And so there was a signed order in 1999 from Clinton setting this up, and it set up the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. And there are 4 centers across the country. So there's an administrative one in Alexandria, there's the military one in Orlando, and they do a lot of gamified simulations. So that's really important to understand as we move towards like VR and gamification, that this is coming out of Orlando and with military connections. There's an academic one at University of Wisconsin-Madison, which again, a lot of gaming, video gaming, and then there's a work-based one in Memphis. So those are the 4 things from ADL. And then I think most of us in the room already know this, but this is seeded through foundation money. Because none of these markets for educational technology can like survive on their own if you're just like, okay, we're gonna have a free market, and like do it, and we're not gonna intervene. They're carefully crafting this market, and we're subsidizing it through our public funds and through our higher education system, and then the foundations are doing, so this is one of my early maps. It's really kind of funny to like look, I'm like, oh, that's much less good than the maps I do today. But this is the Learning Accelerator, which is the star in the middle. And these are these large foundations around the edge, Gates, Hewlett-Packard, the Carnegie Corporation, and they're feeding money into this sort of like accelerator in the middle, and then they feed the money back out into support things like the broadband access and the open education resources and the software platforms and getting computers in everyone's homes, and they build it. So this thing has a very like long ramp that has been coming, but it's been built, and philanthropy is a huge piece. So again, I think somebody mentioned like Digital Promise, that there's some Digital Promise districts in this area. You know, this idea of using tech to put people on the pathways. And in this augmented reality world that I've been talking about, it's not just gonna happen like quick, like that's a lot of work to like put an Internet of Things, sensors, and label everything and get it all matched up. I mean, I've done these Little Sis Maps, and it takes a lot of time. So really, I'm imagining that this shift under the Obama administration of reimagining high schools is essentially they need the people to build them. So you imagine like Manhattan and the folks that built the skyscrapers, and like for generations, you know, they had the steel girders and they went out with the hard hats and they built the skyscrapers. Well, like this generation of kids is the kids who are going to be set up to build the virtual world. Like we're building the virtual world. Like it will look like the real world, but with a layer. So they're in charge of making the layer. And so everybody like, you know, put your shoulder to the grindstone. We're building the virtual world, and the school system is going to do that. So digital promise is a piece of that. The human capital element, and using people as human capital, like the Arnold Foundation, John Arnold was out of Enron. And so it's very interesting because big oil, a lot of interests that are advancing this are tied to the oil industry. So it's like the good news is the peak oil, like the bad news is they're moving their money into other things, which is human capital. And so this was a grant from the Arnold Foundation to Digital Promise to develop blended learning. But again, we're putting kids on these pathways. So the market is growing. It was $2 billion in 2014. It was $8 billion in 2018. They're expecting exponential growth. Global Silicon Valley is one of the major players. They're partnered with Arizona State University and Michael Crow. They have a big annual event every year with like thousands of people rolling this out. If you check out their videos, I mean, it's all laid out on their videos. They have this American Revolution 2.0, how education innovation is going to revitalize America and transform the economy. So our question is like, but we're not going to tell the regular folks what that transformation actually is. So, and the thing is like, I think a lot of people would just like to say, like, why do they not just leave us alone? Like, we're teachers, we know what we're doing. But they need to build the virtual world, and they need to do it through the schools, and they're going to take them over, and they really are the most powerful entities in the world. Like, the most highly capitalized firms are all involved in online learning. And also state surveillance, many of them. But, I mean, and many of them are based in Seattle, like, or have a very strong footprint in Seattle. So when you say, like, why do they not just give us back our classrooms? It's because you have to understand structurally what's happening. They need to take over our classrooms. And right now, they essentially bought out our government. Yeah. Both sides. And this is happening, just to make this very clear, this is like a fully bipartisan venture. And it is not just to run the capital in the U.S., it's global. Right now, it's transnational global capital. So these investments are really happening in, you know, Chinese capital and the Saudis. It's a lot of money. So just to sort of focus, like, there's a couple test cases. This is an interesting individual, like talking about the ways in which people are put in positions of influence and then moving through, you know, representing tech interests either before and after. So this is Ramona Pearson. I would encourage you to look her up. She has a very interesting life story. And then John Kroll, who I guess just finished. They said he like left this month. I don't know. Moved on to something else. Maybe there's some more information about this. But so it's very interesting because he came out of Oakland. And I have to say, like, in terms of the resistance piece, very heartened to see what's happening in Oakland and Oakland community, like pushing back in very direct action ways against this agenda. So Kroll, it's important to understand, IMS Global is part of the digital badging program and also part of personalized learning. And he was an advisor to IMS Global. So, you know, talk about conflict of interest there. So IMS Global, a lot of the bits of how they get information into your learning lockers and track you is through this XAPI software interface. And maybe those of you who are programmers understand more about that. But it used to be called SCORM, Shareable Content Object Resource Module or something like that. And that worked for online learning like Dreambox, things that you were doing through a screen on a computer. But it didn't work for mobile technologies. It didn't work on a phone. It didn't work for wearable tech. So the XAPI is what is going to enable that data capture to flow to your personal digital record. And IMS Global is a key. And if you look them up and you see how many members of IMS Global there are, I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds. Universities, because at this point it's preschool through higher ed and professional learning forever. So when I first started doing this, I was like, Dell funded an initiative to do school report cards. And it was the year that they closed all our schools. And the charter schools weren't going to be affected. And I'm like, oh, Dell, they're here, and they just want to sell their computers. I know what this is about. And of course, at that point, I didn't realize that Dell was one of the major contractors to the NSA. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, there's this other thing going on with Dell besides selling your computers. But so there's the money to be made on the software, and the money to be made on the computers, and the money to be made in the cloud computing. But the thing that I'm really good at talking about is these other two things that nobody's talking about really very much is human capital investments and the predictive profiling. So what happened is when ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, passed, a piece of it enabled what's called Pay for Success finance. And so nobody really fully grasped the significance of this bit. But it is the hinge of everything and is why everything has to be data. One, they need the kids to be trained to build the virtual world, the kids that they feel are have been screened to be appropriate for that task. And so that it's the screening piece, and it's also to make money on their data. So Pay for Success is a way of privatizing. Essentially, it is predicated on austerity. So if things were properly funded and people paid their taxes and the budgets were accountable to the local citizens, and you could have say on how your resources were used, you wouldn't probably have the austerity we have today. But we have to have austerity because without austerity, you can outsource it. So what works government and Moneyball government is the next big piece. And Philadelphia is a big Moneyball government city. Our former mayor, Michael Nutter, was a Democrats for Education Reform, left to go work for Homeland Security and be Michael Bloomberg's salesperson for What Works Government, and his wife became an impact investor. Mm-hmm. And she was in charge of our first Smart Cities grant around human capital that was funded by IBM for badging and digital on-ramps, and as a career academy person. So they were, and he was a really smart guy. Now we have Kenny, Kenny's not a policy wonk like Nutter was. But so this What Works Government is very much bipartisan. So on the one hand, the conservative interests are like, well, we're only paying if it works. So, so we feel fiscally prudent about that. And then on the liberal side, they say, well, we're taking care of people. So it's very attractive. It's a very nice sales pitch to say we're only paying for what it works. So what happens is that the governments create an outcomes-based contract with a nonprofit or some other provider for a service they normally would have provided. And they set a metric of that you have to meet to get this contract, to get the payment back. Now the metric is always going to be something that suits the, that they can hit, because the government is really working in cahoots with the service providers and the investors. They don't want to come up with a number that's impossible. Mm-hmm. They want to come up with it, and so this is, the one example is they have a pre-K. So the Salt Lake City did a pre-K social impact bond, and their metric was, if we give kids a quality pre-K, then they won't need special education services, and we'll save all this money. So they developed a screening tool, and they screened kids, and they said these 100 kids will benefit from this program, this evidence-based program. Goldman Sachs invested, and I don't know if it was 1 or 2 years of pre-K the kids got, but it wasn't a robustly funded pre-K program. It was like the bare minimum funding for this program. And then they rescreened them at kindergarten entry, and they said, oh, of the 99 kids, only one of them needs special education services. And then they negotiate their profit. It's a cost offset. So they would say, giving this child special education services would cost us this amount. If we spend this amount now, which is a smaller amount, and fix you, in quotes, then somewhere between what we spent and what we would have spent, we can carve out a bit of that and give it to you as your investment profit. So this is actually very much connected to carbon credit trading. Mm-hmm. This idea that there's this bad outcome that's going to be very expensive. Mm-hmm. But we don't have money now, but if we can justify it by saying if we spend the money now, we don't spend it later, and then we'll spend more later. So we have big cost offsets around the prison industrial complex is a cost offset. Chronic illness is a cost offset. Mental health, depression is a cost offset. Special education is a cost offset. Under unemployment are these costs. So they have numbers attached to all of these things that will enable them to run these deals. Yes?
How do you find out about this? Is it in legislation, written in legislation?
Yeah. Actually, if anything you're interested in, put a word and then put Pay for Success in Google, and it'll probably come up. So Medicaid, it's tied in with Medicaid. So they're rating every single bit of the public. So when I say this isn't just about education, it's written into the Every Student Succeeds Act. There is that. If you look it up and put in the search bar for the Every Student Succeeds Act, Pay for Success, it will come up. So, and then once you start tugging at it, you realize. I have my friend in the Bay Area, they're a test bed for these. Early literacy is another one. So these early literacy programs, because they're going to be tied to the third grade test scores. So that's the other cost offset. In Santa Clara County, California, which is near San Jose, they have a pre-K program, they have an early literacy program, they have a homeless program, and they have a mental health program. So they're getting all of what's happening now is they're getting all these proofs of concept up, and then they need to work to scale them, and then they need to make it work to be socially acceptable. So the investors front the money. So Goldman Sachs. There's one going on now in Connecticut that is families who have an involvement with Child Protective Services and a substance issue problem. So there's Yale's has an evidence-based intervention. These people go into these people's houses to get their clean scans, get them to pee in a cup, every week for X number of weeks. And the investors in that include BNP Paribas, which is a French bank, and QBE Insurance, which is an Australian insurance company. So they have securitized these investments such that, and the reality is that these families in Connecticut that are subject to this program, for the most part, these are single moms making less than $10,000 a year. So these interventions are not materially helping their circumstance. They are merely using the conditions of their circumstance to create, they're packaged as an investment product for finance capital. So they're looking at securitizing the debt. Now, it's very interesting because once you securitize it, you can also set it up to be shorted. So this idea that you're always going to come up and work for the good outcome is not necessary if half the people are saying you're going to come up with a bad outcome.
Right.
People then become turned into data. In this case, like if we're looking at the metrics in schools are, say, test scores, and the services are ed tech, evidence-based, iReady systems or some such things, and then the children just are, the moms or whomever, the people with mental illness get turned into data, and that's tracked through anything from your Chromebook to your phone to your Fitbit to, these items. And then third parties review the data because it's quote-unquote impartial. So they hire someone. Well, so what's really problematic is that the housing social impact bond in Santa Clara, the data is being reviewed by Palantir. So if you don't know who Palantir is Peter Thiel's company. It was backed by In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital fund, and they're into predictive policing, and they have ICE contracts, okay? So now, in terms of when we're talking about power structures, you're an unhoused person in this county who gets, goodness sakes, like your kid is in school and they find out you're unhoused and they're going to feed you into the welcome home system. Well, maybe your aunt isn't situated with their papers and lives in your household. What then? And Palantir's got your data. So it's very problematic. And then the deal gets paid off. And then it just cycles around. So it's very important to understand how this idea of turning people into financial products is and how it plays out for education, but all social welfare services, because this is the key.
So does it seem to you now, when you looked at elective government, that it's fake, and actually what's really going on in terms of our tax dollars is tied up into this crap? I mean, is it going to get to that point where it doesn't matter who we elect because they're going to be beholden to these
Yes,
types
and
of
I will show you that
contracts?
picture because I went to the Dirksen Senate building and I saw them. And so I was this far from Orrin Hatch, who was doing, they had champagne toasts about this. They were celebrating. They seed money under the Social Impact Partnerships Pay for Results Act. So they've got seed money, and I went, and I was the only regular person in the room of several hundred people. And I was this far from Orrin Hatch, and all of the key people were Republican senators, but the whole panel about the policy were all Obama policy wonks. So, like, if I hadn't had this personal experience of seeing it with my own eyes, and that the room was several hundred people of nonprofits who are all going to benefit from the system of breaking down our social institutions, and then, but realistically speaking, I feel like I work at a botanic garden, and they very well could in the next 5 years say, well, we love you because you work in a low-income community and was subject to all kinds of environmental racism, and you work with the populations that we're really interested in, and we think you do great work, so could you do badges and issue these kids badges into their pathway jobs in horticulture, landscape maintenance?
Oh my God.
And then so how do we prepare for this conversation? Because we are not being included, and by the time it gets rolled out, it will be hard to roll back. And so that's what I'm trying to say is, like, I don't want to be the person giving badges. I mean, I'm the membership person, so I don't actually give badges, but I don't think the social workers want to send people into Palantir's data system. I don't think the nurses want to do that. I don't think any of us really want this future, but if we don't know that it's being laid out, we can't really fight it effectively. Yeah.
But the whole badges system is in service to creating a gig economy.
Correct. Lifelong learning, come on.
There you go.
So just to say, so this hits a little bit, like, I know that there were some situations with, like, a curriculum decision, So in 2014, we found this really great document of all this testimony from ed tech companies that were looking for like the pull mechanisms for high impact learning technologies. And this was testimony submitted to the Office of Science and Technology Policy under the Obama administration. This was 2014. So there's 200 pages of it, but one of them was from Amplify. And they said, well, we think social impact bonds are really great, and social impact bonds are a more complex version of Pay for Success. I think increasingly, social impact bonds were not found to be scalable. There were about 12 of them. So they're backpedaling and not really talking about them as social impact bonds anymore. They say Pay for Success or some paid partnerships. But Amplify in 2014 was like, I think social impact bonds are a great way to pay for our curriculum. This is Rupert Murdoch's curriculum. But we can't quite figure out how to get the data, because it really all runs on data, because that's the game, is that you hit your number. Like, what are our numbers? And so this is from their testimony where they're saying that our indicators of data would be measured time on task, or measured words read, or that you can monitor with fidelity the amount of time students are on devices. You can track their collaboration metrics, meaning tracking interactions online between students and between staff and students. So measuring all of that as data points. Or, and for parents, because you need to turn the parents into data too, is that you measure their logins and how they click through the emails and how they, robustly participate in the online platform. And that's where so when we talk about Pay for Success being success, the success is just making the numbers to pay the contract. It's not meaningfully helping education or helping these families. It's just picking a number you think you can make work and then pushing it. And that's why the tech is there. The Federal Reserve is all part of this. So when I talk about going up, why is this happening? It's not just Google, it's not just the US military. It's also the Federal Reserve. And the San Francisco Federal Reserve is a big piece of this. They've been really instrumental in pushing Pay for Success finance. Steve Rothschild, very interestingly enough, he's from the Twin Cities, which I did not know. I thought we had hatched impact investing in Philadelphia out of the Wharton School and our former Penn president, Judith Rodin. But actually, Steve Rothschild was earlier. He was in the mid-90s in the Twin Cities, right at the same time charter schools were getting their start. Okay, so I think there is synergy between this early privatization and tech. And he created outcomes-based contracts in the Twin Cities area around a workforce, at-risk men being channeled into job systems. So these human capital performance bonds, that's the underpinning of this idea of melding this carbon credit premise with these bonds that you could actually turn people into a bond. And the numbers to make this work and the legitimization of it, because higher ed is a big piece of this, especially in Ivy League institutions. But University of Chicago, surprise, surprise, Jim Heckman, who's a Nobel-winning, prize-winning economist, who's the gentleman in the middle, this is, I think, in San Diego Community Foundation. J.B. Pritzker, who's the current governor of Illinois, funded the creation of an equation for early childhood intervention that guaranteed investors a 7 to 10% rate of return on their investment annually in early childhood education. And they could get it up to 13 if you include health data. Okay, so that's where the wearable tech and the Fitbits comes in. So with the Heckman equation running through the University of Chicago and the backing of Pritzker, for the past 7 years, they have gone up and down California selling the Heckman equation as this great investment in early childhood. And if you actually believe that they were investing in quality child care for kids to have living wage work, that would be one thing. But really they're selling it as using kids to launder global capital and get a locked-in 7% rate of return. And there are implications for how they're getting data out of the preschoolers. It's kind of intense. Yeah.
Is that the same Pritzker that's the governor now?
Yeah. And yeah. So, and there's a lot of Pritzkers in the Bay Area too who are tight with Gavin Newsom in California. So there you go. So it's important to understand, I think context is really important. And this is something that in a suburban situation, it feels different than, I live in Philly, so we're really under siege, but this idea of education living in a space that is defined by increased surveillance, smart city surveillance, risk profiling. I think you had mentioned Gaggle as being something increasingly students are being profiled for how they use technology for potential mental instability and threat scoring. That government is being run by big data, so data-driven government for these contracts. That it's austerity, that we're creating these crazy financial products our environment is falling apart, debt, trauma, racism, structural racism, and state violence. So like, not to be too dark, but like our schools are I mean, it's the reality though. Like this, it's not, if we don't make it better, these folks who are running things are not going to make it any better. And this idea of if we have a future where, a mostly jobless economy, they know that they have to set things in place to keep everyone in line. And that comes through soft policing, hard policing, different things, and profiling and building up as much data and risk scoring on people in advance as possible. And that's kind of what's going on. So again, this idea of compulsory education as feeding into an economic system, and that in and of itself is situated within the history of our country, the history of how power has been used, who has privileges and who doesn't, and an overall worldview. Because I think for the most part, this idea of personalized learning and like precision learning, and it very much fits with sort of the American like capitalist ideal of like bootstrap, and we do, we're doing things on our own and we're in charge of our own destiny and that sort of thing. But it is very much divorced from the idea that really, and what I've framed it as is that this isn't a partisan politics issue, which makes it hard to talk about right now in a time when things are so partisan, right? Everyone wants to point a finger, like to find the person who's at fault. And for me, I look at this like a giant machine. This is a giant machine. I call it the Wendigo. Like it's this giant force of capital, really. It's a machine that is about taking resources and transforming resources and not paying for them. And that the fact that our country essentially has been built on taking resources from indigenous folks, taking labor from enslaved folks, building a finance capital system on top of all of that, is that what has brought us to this point. And even before us, that very much doctrine of discovery and this idea that, terra nullius, like those people don't count, and who counts and who doesn't count. And as we count everything, and now AI is going to count, that these systems of power are embedded in all of it. And it's something that we can't, it's not going to make it easy to fix, but I think we really have to fully internalize that we need a transformational change to take this on, that it's not something that we're going to tweak away or one election cycle is going to do it. So this is just a quote. This is the Future of Work State Policy Agenda from the Aspen Institute, where they're saying that that they're planning on partially automating over 90% of the jobs in the next 12 years. And that we should all be lifelong learners and have skills-based training. So it didn't actually come with the Amazon Flex image, but I threw that in there because I think that exemplifies this idea that we are going to use you as capital until you are redundant, and then we're going to try to reskill you, and we're going to try to pay the least amount possible and have interchangeable parts, so we always have an oversupply to suit our purposes, and that's sort of the economy where things are going. This is called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and what that involves is the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, genetic engineering, and quantum computing. So these are sort of these pieces. Now, the World Economic Forum opened a Fourth Industrial Revolution Center in the Bay Area in 2017, and Inslee was at the ribbon cutting. Okay, which is interesting because not in his state. So when we're talking about him like taking on this prominent public role, I think it's very indicative that he was present at that event, and he is one of the Moneyball for government governors. So these are Colorado and Washington really are on the leading edge of this career pathways, 21st century economy movement, and Raimondo and Rhode Island. These are all folks who are on this leading edge of they're the change they want to see. So human-computer interaction, it's really creepy the way in which they really want us to spend lots of quality time with computers and devices. I think we all heard about the Kaiser Permanente situation where the person got like a terminal diagnosis from a doctor on a screen. That was a big blow up. This is now, I believe, which are these little robots that they're actually using small robots for autistic support in Philadelphia School District. Oh my gosh. So they're working on and again, what data is being captured on those interactions. And then they're trying to figure out how to build cheap robots that do things, but weirdly they also come with haptic controllers. So this woman, this clothes folding machine is actually not an AI thinking about folding things. It's run by somebody remotely in some other place. So you don't have to worry someone's going to steal your stuff because they're in the warehouse driving the robot that's in your bedroom. So it's all safe. but I don't know how that's going to work, but that's what they're working on. And this is actually happening. So the Kiwi bots, they're these little delivery, like fast food delivery things in, is it Berkeley? That they were, the people, those are not self-driving robot delivery things. They're driven by people, I believe in Bolivia, who are paid $2 an hour to drive them with haptics. So there are, it's like the last mile principle, that there's a human being that runs around and gets the food from the various providers and like loads up like 10 Kiwi bots and then like steps back, and then the people who are in South America drive them to the dorm rooms. But these are things that are being piloted, again, telescreen doctors. And then below, this is a really interesting, and I'll send you a link to this because this is something to spend some time with, this idea of XAPI technology and workforce training. This is JCA Solutions, is a defense contractor, but this is based on competency-based education and XAPI on how to capture data about task completion. So look, you can see they're training these middle school kids to like work in warehouse factories, and that you don't even have to really learn how to work the machine because your AI glasses, Google Glasses, will tell you what buttons to push. And in terms of reskilling, like just don't think, just do what the computer tells you to do. So again, smart cities, y'all smart cities. Suzanne Delbene really big on the, and it does, so the smart city, and a lot of it, it's hard to tell how much of this is vaporware and how much of it is real, because they're trying these things out. Our first smart city technology were these big belly trash cans, which are really dirty and grimy, and they were supposed to send a signal like, I'm full, and like you would have like really lean efficiency where they would only go to the trash cans that were full, and they're really grungy, nobody wants to touch them, and then evidently somebody told me they never turned on the talkie part, which is great, because like that's why I have hope for Philly, is like we're kind of half-assed about everything, so like maybe they'll never plug it in. But there are things called SUFA benches, where they have surveillance technology benches with artificial vision in them that are like solar charging phones, but by the way, they're counting who's in the park. And a lot of it is going to hang on existing infrastructure, so smart light poles are a big piece, and they're going to like layer in, charging stations and surveillance and oh, actually, I don't know if you guys have them here. Link, these, they're like billboards, like digital billboards, but that you can plug in your phone to them or make digital calls. But I think they're Google technology. They have them in Philly and New York. And so the house folks are using, because you need your phone, are using it. But once you attach your phone to it, it will ping you against every other kiosk in the area and map those transportation patterns. So these systems are being put in. This one is the Array of Things in Chicago, and it's Comcast. So we're the headquarters for Comcast, which they just built another giant skyscraper. So they're going to run our life through their data, but it's Philly, Chicago, and the Bay Area are Machine Q, which is their Internet of Things system. So Array of Things is part of that. Sidewalk Labs is Alphabet, Google. And this is something that there was an article that just came out the other day, but they were talking about that there's a document where they're envisioning, they're working in Toronto, there's a lot of pushback in Toronto about the data and what Google's doing, but they were envisioning almost like having a special services district that would be like Google's part of your city, and they would have their own police forces, they would have their own charter schools, they would have their own transportation infrastructure, and then all of this would be overlaid with smart data collection, okay? And the interesting thing is, within thinking about impact investing, is that if you weren't doing anything too bad, they might like use some other form to do root cause assessment tools, sort of look at your poverty or look at your situation and channel you into a system. So it's really important to understand, because Google is also getting into managed healthcare, and it's called CityBlock, and I think block is for blockchain and blockchain healthcare records.
Evacuation, please. Evacuation, please.
No. Evacuation. She said evacuate. What?
Well, maybe if they come knock on the door, we'll do that. So Suzanne Delbene, so they created an Internet of Things caucus in Congress, and she's the co-chair. So y'all are in it deep. Things like medical compliance, they're putting things on pill bottles so they'll know, which on the one hand you're like, oh, but the elderly, like I need to know if my dad who lives in the other state took his medication. But on the other hand, it's like, well, what if it's Purdue, right? And they're like, well, you didn't take all your OxyContin. You didn't fill it to the end, and we know because your pill bottle was, checking up on you. So we really need to think about these technologies. The rabbit hole that I went down that really The deep one was Global Education Futures Forum, and this is an infographic, the green one from them, about the future of education. So the me person is in the middle, and this is them sort of navigating this Internet of Things world. And this is, I'm sorry, my thing is not so great, but this is talent investing. So this is the human capital investment piece. There's no teachers. There's wearable technology up here. You have some mentors. There's stuff about energy and like cooking. So they don't want to just know your work. They want to know all your business. And then, you know, if just so I don't, like, people don't believe this, but, you know, the Director General of the Internet stuff at the EU is talking about Internet of Humans. And there's a really long, you know, this will come with a link, but if you look up, this is a long post about setting up single data markets in the EU. So they're setting up, like, I'm like, is that why you created the EU? So you could have, like, global human capital markets? I mean, it went to the mid-90s, like, who knows who was thinking what when, but they're definitely building it, and that's you know, this is not fringe stuff. This is real. So again, thinking about this panopticon, I've talked about the overlay web. I don't know if y'all have watched Black Mirror at all. I think Black Mirror is setting this all up. But there's an episode called Nosedive, which is, this is kind of an interesting take on it, but essentially like social credit scoring. All of your interactions, you're rating people, and the way your behaviors in this sort of new dystopic world changes your number, and then what you're able to do and your freedoms or your opportunities are really determined by that. And there's a really earlier book called We by Yevgeny Zamatayan, which was supposed to have informed like Brave New World, but about living in a panopticon where people only get 1 hour a day to have their blinds down. They live in glass houses and they're all numbers. And he's a mathematician. It's a little dry, but I sort of think the kind of people who are trying to build this world are that kind of person. So it's very interesting. But this idea that we are creating an education system for people not only to build the virtual world, but we know it's going to be really crappy and hackable. And we know that the Chinese or, you know, whoever is going to come and bring it down. Or, you know, the people who want to hold your data hostage for money. So then all of us are not going to be able to write books and do plays and, you know, take care of people and, you know, teach people, but we're all going to have to be cyber warriors and, like, defend the thing we built, or the thing they made us build. And that's what we are talking about. Like, what does it look like? What does militarized existence look like in a smart world? And I think it's something to really be very serious about. So the other thing is that education, the gaming world, the video gaming world is a very big piece of this. They're very influential. And we need to understand, so I was at a panel forum sponsored by Atlantic Magazine in 2016 when the Democratic National Convention was in Philadelphia. And I have a good friend, she's like, you need to come to this panel, Teaching the Creative Economy. And I went, and so this panel, Suzanne Delbene was on this panel with this woman, Constance Seinkuehler, who is with video games. She's at was at University of Wisconsin-Madison at the time, which is where ADL is based. And this guy, Paul Megan of Epic Games. Essentially, this was like, we just need more people to code our video games. I'm like, how is that? And this was in 2016, so I hadn't, like, really, the stuff about the gaming has really only hit me in the last, like, 6 to 8 months. I'm like, why are we making our school district to build? He doesn't need us to build his video, he needs us to code the world. So Epic Games, they created Fortnite, okay, so which is the multimedia, you know, soldier game. They scaled it with, so Tencent, which is one of the second largest companies in China next to Alibaba, and they have their own social credit scoring system, and WeChat Pay, own 40% of Epic Games, which is based in Raleigh-Durham. And their capital scaled Fortnite, okay? So we are creating virtual worlds with virtual economic systems. We're conditioning children to virtual economies in classroom economies. This is PBIS, tokenized reward systems. Epic Games has something called Unreal Engine, which helps them, I'm not a gaming person or a coding person, but my understanding is, like, there's a real complex systems to be able to be in a virtual space and have it real time be right and everything. So they're using this engine, the software engine, to create synthetic people. And a lot of this is actually also happening with the Army and at USC. So this is a clip where they're presenting at Disney. So it's like, great, the Army plus Disney and gaming. To talk about their Unreal Engine, the guy on the screen is a synthetic person from Australia. So it's not like Skype, like he's talking, it's like he's actually been synthesized and like controlled with haptic controllers.
So he's not a human being.
He's like a mediated human being. And he's saying that this is going to be great for education and healthcare and these other things. So this is the world that the gaming people, and they're also using it to like sell us things and make worlds for us to live in and a lot of other things, but it's far beyond just a video game at this point, and we have to understand how the economics fits in. So yeah, I have a lot more to go. But so Internet of Screens, like this is just a sad picture, but like we kind of figured out, like we kind of know the screen part, right? The AI, I think Susan had mentioned, so increasingly, it's not necessarily even going to be the software programmers in charge, because once they unleash these things, these algorithms are going to start deciding. Pearson is very much into AI. They were talking about trying to come up with a DARPA for AI education, and saying that, you know, essentially we're going to have sophisticated models that capture data about a learner's emotional and physical state to inform what they get. So when we understand the structural nature of race and class and the scarcity of jobs and living wage labor, like there are just so many ways that that's clearly not going to go well. The piece, the Virtual Human Toolkit, the USC Institute for Creative Technologies, they're building that with the Army Research Lab. So a lot of the CGI stuff in films, the fake people, they're building. The other piece is understanding that Pearson is also involved in impact investing in human capital. So this is their Affordable Learning Fund is tied to ed tech and impact investing. So you sort of mix these together as like, oh, if we can, and that's the piece about the Heckman equation, I'll mention it later, but they said we can't really change your cognitive data that well because the IQ scores, you know, that hardens up around the age 10, and that doesn't move enough for hedge funds. He didn't say hedge funds, but he's like, that doesn't really move enough. What we can move is character. We can move character, and that's the number we can move. So that non-cognitive stuff gets to be really important for the investors when you have to move a number, and they're planning on doing it digitally. So when you
that's all
talk
the
about
talk we hear about social
emotional learning, yeah.
So that's what that's all about.
Yeah, like they can, and you know, I know a lot of folks are talking about like, it's a little psyopsy though, right? And you start layering in these high stakes data that your brain numbers come out, right? And it's all of this stuff about caring about the whole child and your mental health. You really have to wonder. So these are some examples of wearable tech. They're talking about using virtual reality to generate empathy. That's an impact market, like, you know, to force people, like, and not that I'm against empathy. I think empathy is great. I think, but I always say, like, what would, you know, Lenny Riefenstahl have done with an Oculus Rift, right? Like, you can make that into a torture device. And there's a lot of behavioral data that gets captured out of these Oculus Rifts and the haptics that go along with it. BrainCo is out of Harvard. They market it in China. I think I heard China just finally kicked them out. Yeah. But, you know, they're trying to normalize it there. This little girl with the puppet, that's the Internet of Things puppet. So this is called Play, P-L-A-E. It's a project out of NSF funded out of Indiana University. And so there's no reason there needs to be Internet of Things on that puppet. But again, they want to track movements of people and make predictions. The Wildflower Montessori School, which is a franchise, there's a parent from MIT, and he got them to put Internet of Things sensors in all the kids' slippers and put beacons in the shoes so that over the course of the day, they could track the children's social engagements and also how they related to teachers and where they were in the space. Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go to a session from Stanford about special ed, and I would never have believed what you were saying until I heard them. He has talked a group of students from prenatal, the parents, all the way up into adulthood, and he puts I think I sent it to you.
Yeah.
He puts the things on their heads and he's monitoring them.
Because
And
they need to engineer their brains.
That's exactly what he was saying, and he was proud of it.
Yeah.
He was proud of it.
But
this is going to solve all these problems.
Well, right. But I mean, I think then our question is, solve it for whom, right? Like, we know that the economy they're planning doesn't need people. So how are they engineering their brain to make that acceptable to people, to accept that they have not a very hopeful future? And I just, so it breaks my heart. But the other piece, the Tesserae project, there's a companion called the Mosaic project. This is DARPA funded. There's about 5 universities involved, Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a huge force behind this. But they actually wanted people to wear sensors, not just at work, but at home, and to track their stress level and their sleep patterns to posit their future productivity as workers. One of them was tied to the like the NSA, people working in intelligence, and the other was just everybody else. So imagine, like, if to get your gig job, you have to have a portfolio of, like, wearing, your wearable tech into your uploaded profile for the week prior, so they can decide, the AI, like not even a person anymore, can screen you and decide of the 20 applicants who has the best profile for the job based on your sleep patterns. And they're building it, like, again, it's the Norbert Wiener thing. Do I think it's all gonna happen? I don't think it's all gonna happen. Parts of it are gonna happen. None of it sounds good, but we need to know about these projects. And again, higher ed is legitimizing this. And the other piece is digital medicine. And people don't even know this exists yet. So, I mean, most people. You're going to hear a lot about executive function. Zuckerberg is backing these ACE video games, which is like precision to help focused executive function. That's being templated in San Jose schools. Medicaid is tied to pay for success. Okay, so now Akili is developed a prescription pediatric video game treatment for ADHD that went through clinical trials at Duke and I think is almost done FDA completion. Okay, so they're going to be able to issue prescriptions for prescription video games. And they have a whole big line of things behind it. So depression, a lot of other mental health issues. And so you can imagine once you tie pay for success to something like that and Medicaid reimbursement, and Big Pharma is behind this, and this will come off as like, well, we don't have the, people are uncomfortable about using pharmaceuticals. Hey, you're not ingesting this, you're just playing the video game. But you're creating then incentives within school settings now as we do these screenings of potentially medicalizing children into these digital interventions in ways, it's hard to know how that would stop. So I think people, it's time to play your medicine. That's what, this is the company's logo. And Joy Ito of MIT Media Lab was one of the key folks, his venture capital was behind it. So,
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is quite a lot to absorb.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Could you give me a concrete place that I could look at a video that a person child that's really depressed, that I could watch so I see how this actually works?
Well, so, I can send you the link to the Akili website. I don't have one for depression. Like, I don't know that they don't have one developed for depression yet. And some of this stuff could very much be vaporware, like fake. I think a lot of this stuff is fake. But if they break everything else and say your only choice is to do the terrible broken thing, what are our choices? So,
Who in their right mind making these decisions? Even people who have a lot of money or can profit from a lot of this, they want to keep making money. But, who in their right mind wants to take a child that has some real problems and sell them some software instead of pharmaceuticals, which are probably both bad? Maybe you need some.
yeah. Well, I think
what is the
yeah.
bottom line here?
Well, so,
Do this to people.
Google and IBM and Amazon and the
Now,
military.
you're saying that is a company.
Yeah.
They are represented by people.
Right. So, so our question is, so they're saying that the economy doesn't really need that many people. We're going to build an economy where
Who's saying that?
so Aspen Institute, Davos,
You
Global.
can't just use vaping.
Okay.
Who's saying that?
So
Who is coming out
that's
here?
the fourth industrial revolution. That's Inslee. That's the World Economic Forum. They're saying that the plan, there's the Markle Foundation, the future of work. If you Google it.
Governor Inslee's going to get up and say, we don't need to market anymore with people.
No, they're going to say, we're going to put you on a pathway to a job. That's what they're going to say. So hang with me, because they're still going. Yeah. So this is people with very much power who are trying to control the masses who have increasingly less power, and which is to say that we can still resist this. Like, we can say when someone comes in and says we're going to set up these intervention services through your school social worker, I'm here to say, beware, this is out there. So that when it comes into your school door and they say, well, we would like to have Medicaid services and mental health screenings in your school, you can say, well, does it involve pay for success? What data is being collected? What types of interventions are you looking at? Can you refuse? Those are the things what I'm trying to say, because I don't know when it will all show up or where it will all show up. But it's not, this isn't a fringe thing. So let me just, okay, Red Critter, there's two pieces to this. One is career tracking. Yeah, it's good. And one is classroom. So this is, again, behavioral compliance to digital economics. If you're behaving, the teacher can zing currency and skills points to your wristband with wearable tech.
Oh, good. So those are wristbands.
Yeah, it's hard to see. So there's a wristband here, and there's an app, and the teacher, if you're behaving well, can send you that. And then there's also parent notifications, because again, when the business model is data, you also need to maximize the number of people interacting with your interface to get the most data possible. So there'll be like a parent portal there too, that you'll be tracking if the parents are paying attention to everybody's virtual. And Google has Classcraft. There are versions of this, Class Dojo. There are many, many versions of this, but this is the first one I've seen with wearable tech, which is interesting. And it also has an equivalent. So okay, we're in this, say, 7 years from now, and they've built prototypes. We're in Toronto. We're visiting Toronto, and we're in the smart world of Sidewalk Labs. They've figured out how to make this stuff work. All of this information, like we're pinging against things, like is it Minority Report? Or maybe it's Super Sad True Love Story is a book. It's a really good book, but talking about like your credit score pinging against these built environment. Your built environment has all of these sensors and beacons. Where does it go? Well, to make these predictive analytics for the human capital, they needed to hang somewhere, because if your data is just all dispersed, it's not really useful. They can't make any sense out of it, or they can't pretend to make sense out of it. So they needed to hang somewhere. So they've been working really hard for a long time. Tim Berners-Lee, many folks, if you look at the self-sovereign identity system, to create blockchain identity. So this idea of having a platform, and they will sell it to you as privacy. And this is my concern around a lot of the privacy conversations. They'll say, we want you to be able to keep things private, so you can have your own digital identity, and you can lock your data, and you can open it up when you want to various things. And you can become a brand, and you can curate yourself like as your data, things you do online, and where you go, and what you buy, and what you do through your education modules and your workforce training. Like, you can really build yourself. You can build yourself as a good American worker in the gig economy. And so this social impact, this is also tied in with the UN Sustainability Development Goals, which, if you look of the 17 UN Sustainability Development Goals, only 4 are actually about land and water and air quality and carbon. 12 of them are about human capital and poverty, anti-poverty. So there's these 2 tracks of impact investing tied to the UN SDGs. One is the human capital track, and one is the nature track. But the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition, these are the things they're working on. You can see identity and vulnerable populations, because this is being piloted through refugees and humanitarian aid, and then education, which is UN SDG 4. Healthcare is one of them as well. So this is an image. I'm so sorry that this light is not good. But it's essentially, it lives on your phone, like until they put a chip in your hand. And it's collecting this information on your welfare, your voting, what aid you get, any licenses and certifications, your banking, your signature, your healthcare. It all lives in this one place. And then so this top image is from our Smart City contract that I mentioned from IBM, is that IBM recommended that we have a federated view of the constituent in the cloud. And I didn't understand what that was when I first came across it. I'm like, that is really strange, a federated view of the citizen
What
in the
about the
cloud.
4th Amendment of the Constitution?
Well,
I mean, where's that?
well, they're gonna make you private, and you can have your stuff. It'll just be in the cloud, and it's tied with Gates and MacArthur and the badging. So all of these things will live, but they actually are piloting blockchain identity in Austin now. So with unhoused, so vulnerable populations. So they're refining it through humanitarian aid. Bloomberg is bringing it into Austin. We have homeless problems. What's the answer? Well, we're going to put you on blockchain, because if we're going to help you, we need to know how much we helped you so that we can make our deals run. And actually, I have a friend who is navigating a lot of these. She has a chronic health condition and is on assistance. And the Obama phones. I didn't know about the Obama phones until my friend was like, oh yeah, the Obama phones. If you're low income and all your benefits have to run through your phone. So you get the Obama phones, and that's sort of the precursor to your identity lives on your phone. So this blockchain identity proofs of concept, they're doing these pilots right now. The state of Illinois has a blockchain working group. Evernym, they have an agreement with Evernym to do birth certificate registrations. And so this is Pritzker, right? But this was done under Rauner, so this is bipartisan. So both Republicans and Democrats. Rauner got this set up. It's still moving forward. The first blockchain baby was born in Tanzania last year. So they gave both the mother and child each a digital identity and tracked their health appointments, their prenatal health appointments. And they said if you did all the things you were supposed to, you could earn a token like for an umbrella that you could change for an umbrella. So that's happened. Amply, which is this pink square here, is a pre-K blockchain identity. So Amply, again, when we're understanding like race and power and these dynamics, was piloted in Cape Town, South Africa. They have a franchise pre-K program, and they assigned every child a digital identity on blockchain, and the school had a blockchain identity, and they were reimbursed based on daily attendance, but it ran through an app. So when the child attended, and they told all the teachers, we know it's too hard for you to do paper, here's this app. And so when the child attends the school, they get logged on the app, and they're framing it as building social capital. The child builds social capital while going to pre-K. And then this token that's generated is turned in by the childcare provider to the government for reimbursement. So it's tracking, but I don't know what other metadata is tied onto, like, oh, you came late, you came in consistently, what other pieces are there. So these systems, again, it's not scalable yet, but they're out there. And this is being done with Omedear Network, PR Omedear, eBay is very much tied into the digital identity space. With UNICEF has Innovation Fund working on AI and blockchain and drones. And it's weirdly funded. Their largest funder is Disney and the foreign ministries of Denmark and Sweden. Or Finland, Sweden, Denmark and Sweden. Two more countries. I can't remember exactly. I know, definitely Denmark. So yeah, they're doing drones and AI from UNICEF. So it almost doesn't sound real, but I followed the money like it's real. You can look it all up. And now Gates is clearly part of all of this, seeding these markets in human capital. They're part of, so Microsoft and Accenture have teamed up with the UN to do Identity 2020, which is they want all of the, they're anticipating with the climate catastrophe that there will be mass migrations of people. Right? I mean, we're already even seeing it in California. We need to be able to track where the people go when they say, oh, pick up in the middle of the night and you have to leave, either from environments or, warfare or whatever. You don't need your papers. We'll just have your biometric blockchain identity that'll have all your stuff. And they're rolling it out through their global vaccination program. So, and now, in addition to blockchain, it may not even be on blockchain. Like, they're still trying to figure out blockchain and how to make it all work. But even any kind of digital identity, they're doing mobile driver's licenses now. So this Idemia company is digitizing driver's licenses in Colorado and Oklahoma. And they're putting all of this information, and now I think there was just an announcement about legislation advancing on a real-time driver surveillance program, so that all of this data will be, like, if you get pulled over, you have to pull up your phone, and, like, all of your data is there. So, who says it's good? So this is Robert McChesney. He's a very well-known sociologist, and this is from a talk he actually gave with John Nichols in Seattle in 2016. And they had written a book called The Fight Against a Jobless Economy and a Citizenless Democracy. And in this talk, he has this point. He said, they got invited to Davos, and they're like, unless you're in Davos, you don't know this stuff. Like, all people at Davos know this stuff, but most people don't unless you get in. He said that he had a PhD student of his in a meeting with one of the big German manufacturing companies, but it was like a global manufacturing, but based in Germany, and who said, hey, someone said, hey, should we be worried about this automation stuff? Like, we're hearing a lot about the automation stuff. And the guy's like, well, we could pretty much automate all our factories tomorrow. Only the German middle class would burn. So we don't know how to do it just yet. Okay? So we're going to have, like, digital driver's license real-time surveillance programs. Like, they know they can do it, like, technically, but they know that people would rise up. So they're trying to, like, how do we softly control people? How do we put systems of hard control in place so that when we flip that switch, that we're prepared as they think they're going to be. So again, education within the economy. So understanding that education has always been shaped compulsory to serve the needs of industry. So, we're an agricultural nation and became an industry. Well, we had to shift this system for that. And then guess what? We're a globalized world, and we really don't need people in factories here anymore. Well, okay, they'll send a bunch of people to prison. Well, now, okay, so prison's pretty expensive. Like, the MacArthur Foundation, they're behind both the learning ecosystems and prison reform. Like, they're like, we'd really rather not have to manage prisons. We'd really not have to manage schools. Who wants to pay for a boiler? Maybe we could just have you be poor and you have to take care of all of your own stuff, but if we can track you digitally, it won't really matter. We still profit from you and control you. So now we're moving into the pay for success. We're like having kids in schools, at least for the meantime. You can profit off of them from their poverty data. So I do think that what we're seeing in Philly is less about charter schools and more about portfolio schools that are being turned over to management companies and the rise of the community school model to move more towards this pay for success profit center. So again, just these two graphics out of KnowledgeWorks, I think talks to atomization. And again, within understanding disruption and capitalism, things have to be broken more and more down. And people become more and more and more isolated, and things become more and more and more fragmented. And so it's not enough to have a degree. You can't have a degree anymore. You need a badge. You can't just have a badge. You need a micro-credential. Like everything has to become smaller and smaller so that the data gets bigger and bigger. And these images, I think, speak to confusion and complexity and how do you navigate this? And I'm by myself, and like who's with me? And I think these are all things that really I struggle with in thinking about this model is I think it's on purpose. Because the idea of us all getting together in a room and talking about this is probably like really scary. Like even if there's only 30 of us, because we're together, like even though we have some technology, like talking as people to one another.
So you had a slide a while back, and I wrote it down, that quoting some guy who said, well, all of this is for things that people need in their lives, like trust and security. And then I see right there, your social relations systematically broken, isolated, and so right.
Yeah.
So if your technology becomes your security, I'm secure in what's on my phone and what they tell me here, rather than what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But they know to talk about trust and
yeah.
security, but it's a new kind of trust.
It's a new, well, and what's really interesting is within this larger historical context, blockchain is always framed as the trust, the third party of trust. So like right now you have like a notary, or you have someone who's an intermediary, like your bank, between transactions. And they're saying if you remove the need for that and you have cryptography be that, it becomes faster and more diverse and broad and globalized. You can have globalized currency in real time. But it's really interesting because I think a lot of this is predicated in some ways on sort of global economic systems where different people have different currencies. Like we're going back to scrip, like the company town, and you're paid and your access to your resources are tied into like individual different kinds of currency systems. In early 19th century, the US, and I think there's part of me that when I look at the role of like the northern finance in New York that it played in the domestic slave trade in the early 19th century when states had different currencies and you were transporting people from one part of the country to the other and managing these complex financial transactions that were very high in the amount of money, and the role that New York played, because one of the key individuals in all of this is Paul Tudor Jones, who runs the Robin Hood Foundation and is tied to the Harlem Children's Zone. And he got his start in cotton futures trading. Okay, so right now they are trying to replace the New York finance with blockchain. And there's pieces of me that just keep thinking about like, are these people at Wharton like looking at 19th century finance, like banking systems? Because as the world fragments and starts to fall apart more and more, are they looking to these other? And probably not, but it's interesting, yeah. Susan.
So, could this be the reason why like there's now Apple credit, and then Facebook is now trying to generate their own money, their own monetary system,
Yeah.
and all that stuff is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're experimenting. Like I don't know, what do they call it? There's a word when you talk about like this transitional moment. Like we're in this, they haven't figured it out, which I think is still a moment of a lot of potential. Like they're experimenting with things, they haven't got it all figured out. I do think a lot of this stuff is made up. I mean, it's very interesting because the Global Impact Investment Network, which is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and essentially set the rules of the game for impact investing. Because if you have very big players and they're not all agreed to play by the rules, no one's going to play the game. Right? So they have to have a legitimizing force to say, these are what these values and metrics and numbers mean, and we're all in agreement, right? And then, like, if you're going to play, you need to know, like, we're all following the same rules. And online, it looks like this thing. You're at the Rockefeller Foundation, Judith Rodin from Penn, and all this. And so it's actually based in Berwyn, which is on the main line outside of Philadelphia. And I'm like, I'm going to go see it. Because my background and my training is in cultural landscapes. So I see these things in the digital world. I'm like, I'm going to go see it. And I went and saw it. And it was an old rundown railroad building, because the main line is the railroad trunk line out of Philadelphia. And it was like this soggy, beige 19th century building with like kind of dusty floral vases in the window, and it was the Exton Dog Show. They share a space with the Exton Dog Show. And so you see this thing, right, that looks like a thing, and I think it still is a thing, but their physical presence isn't that. And so I think if we can somehow inform people to say the emperor has no clothes. The emperor has no clothes. We're not doing this. We're not going on the video games. Like that we can, we can fight back. So Carnegie was a key player. He was the one who set up the Carnegie unit, right? The Carnegie credit that you need to be in school, because you need to be in school so you know your place. Know your place. You folks are doing this and you folks are doing that. And it was taking me a really hard time to come to this realization, because I was fortunate. I went to a suburban, well-funded school district, and I was very good at following these rules, and I felt very self-validated that I was very good at this, and I was on these tracks, and I had no idea of all the other people or what paths they were on, because I was with my little group of people, and that's the role that would play. But now they don't need people in schools, because they've got robots that are being run by haptic controllers, and I keep envisioning big fourth industrial factories in Canada, like secured, and then people in Bangladesh, like with haptic, telepresence suits, running the robots, because I think that's how this machine will want to work. But they don't want kids in schools anymore, because they're more valuable if they're out there alone generating data.
So again, you have their tech-mediated reskilling, not re-education.
No, it's skills.
And
it's not about education anymore.
A good friend of mine, when we were talking about, do you want them to have training or do you want them to be educated? He goes, well, think of it like this. Do you want your children in school to get sex training or sex education?
Oh, that's an interesting.
So because the other part of this that they're not paying so much attention to and they don't want to say anything is, we get education to learn how to be citizens, to be thinking people, to understand how our country works. If all it is about having a job, then we're destroying ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, in part of it, and this is sort of my politics, is understanding that this is all working. This is the logical extension of how this works. Like, we have come to this next phase of settler colonialism is to jump into the virtual world and pull us all along with it. Like, our world is used up. Capitalism has used up this world. We got to build a new one so that we can take that profit out. And so I really feel like, in terms of understanding how the country works, it's like that's a little bit of a loaded, like how they want us to think it works, like how it actually has historically worked, and deconstructing that, because I think the folks for whom it has never worked and the people on the front lines of this are going to be the ones who can build the thing that we need, which is the opposite of this fourth industrial revolution. And so, yeah, there's just so much to say. So Mark Tucker, the National Corporation Center on Education and the Economy, they've all been about aligning education to the workforce. And this goes back quite some time, and he was Carnegie's guy. So Mark Tucker was working with Carnegie. He was hired. They were the underpinnings for Common Core state standards. So they were working also with Pew. So Booth Gardner, who was the governor in the 80s, was pursuing these schools of the 21st century. And he saw the Carnegie report that Tucker put together about the sort of future of education, and he's like, come to Washington, like, we should work together. And Brian Benzel became the point person for sort of school innovation in the late 80s, early 90s. And this is all sort of as tech is really ramping up. And then there's this bigger transition that happens when we shift to cloud-based computing. But Edmonds, Everett, North Shore, and Shoreline were the districts that they were experimenting on through this thing called restructuring education. And they got a big grant to pilot these different schools. So it was called the National Alliance for Restructuring Education in 1989, and these were the partners. And it's an interesting assortment, but a lot of them are smart cities, a lot of them are cities of LRNG, and Xerox was a big partner. And at the time, Xerox was going to be the model for total quality management, which was all of the rage about looking to Japan and managing education for this system and for the system of the American workforce. So this woman, Lauren Resnick, was a close affiliate with Tucker, and she was at Pitt, and that's where the Common Core State Standards came from, because really if you're going to engineer people to an economic system, you needed to digitally mediate it through data. So ONET is actually based in Raleigh, Durham, and it's a joint public-private partnership where they are actually creating all the jobs and descriptions with tiny little, very specific things of all the skills. And that's kind of sort of the brain of engineering the economy. And the Work for Innovation and Opportunity Act was signed under Obama, and it's part of this whole package is that every region is supposed to have its targeted workforce sectors. And it's not exactly like the Hunger Games, because they only like had one, but it's sort of like, here are eight things. These are the 8 things we do. So you grow up in this zone, and this is your things. Where are we plugging you in? This is all backed by the Chamber of Commerce. And that picture up there is a picture of me at a protest event. Girard College is in my neighborhood. It was set up by Stephen Girard, who was the Bill Gates of his day. He was into anthracite coal. He created this private school for homeless white boys in the 1830s and built a giant wall around it. And there's a Greek temple in there, and it's a school that was the site of one of the largest, most significant civil rights struggles in the North. Cecil B. Moore desegregated that school. But the Chamber of Commerce went in there to have a private meeting about the role of business in public education in Philadelphia, and no one was invited who wasn't a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and you couldn't get in. But the ironic thing is because of the nature of this campus site, it had a 15-foot stone wall all the way around it. It's like a half, maybe 6 city blocks long. There's only one gate, so we blocked their gate on the way in. But we were like, business is not allowed to decide what education is, because if you just think about it, they'll flood the market. They have no interest in coming up with, well, we want just enough people that we can give you a really good job and pay you a nice wage and give you good benefits like that. Not unless we demand it is that going to happen anymore. So that's how, and they want soft skills because they want people who will go along with it all. So now they're moving towards something called a Mastery Transcript, the Mastery Transcript Consortium, which is with very posh private schools, which is interesting because I think they're piloting with them because those kids will never need a transcript because they'll get their job not through ONET. But they want it to seem fancy, like, oh, well, if they're doing it at, the so-and-so, Exeter School, then we should, it's good enough for them. We want that too. Give it to us, And so they want, this is sort of the leadership profile of the student and their project management experience. And then over here is people analytics out of Wharton, and them talking about using gamification to pull data analytics on people, and we know that they're talking about using AI and gaming to do HR screenings for jobs now. So that's in the pipeline. And then this one down here is from the military, the Army Research Lab, talking about human performance management data and using XAPI to pull that data in. So, thinking about risk rolling. So, finance, Tom Vander Ark. How many of you guys know Tom Vander Ark? Yeah. So this is the rabbit hole. This is a piece of their map, and you should really look at Global Education Futures Forum website in full if you haven't, because people are like, how do you know this? I'm like, I just read what they say they're going to do and pay attention because they have this map that says through 2035 of all their plans. And here they say we're coming up with new models of human capital investment. And that there's going to be in small print an education crisis that will finish off traditional education. You have to come up with a new plan. And then over here they're talking about genetic passports and assigning your education based on your genotype data. Right? And up there, they're talking about having periodic health assessments and mental health so we can readjust your trajectory, based on what your mental health status is. So this is pretty intense stuff. And again, do I think they're going to get all rid of it? I don't think they're going to do all of it, but they're doing the new models of human capital investment for sure. And Vander Ark was behind it, and he was the superintendent of the first statewide virtual school in the country at Federal Way. So, he's been in this game a long time. Again, I talked about this is it's almost like a plumbing problem. You have a very few people who have all the money, and they can't make more money if their money doesn't move, and the poor people can't buy stuff. What do? Well, you turn the poor people into a commodity, and then you gamble on their life. And that's the plan. And you do it through public-private partnerships. And the people who are investing in this stuff, we're all, like, if you have a pension or a 401k or something, like, we're probably in on it because that's where the money lives. But also your insurance premiums go to this. And the Vatican is super interested, the Vatican Bank, very much. They've had 3 impact conferences. I highly suspect that the Mormons are too, and the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And the global banks and high net worth people. So anyone with a big pot of money that they have to keep flowing to get their more money is part of this. So we've done that. This is just hitting on Palantir again. This is Project Welcome Home, and they're just advertising it. Like, hey, it's a breakthrough in homelessness. Look, we can make money on homeless people, even though they have no money. Isn't that amazing? It's just capitalism. And this is important to think is that I think any of you guys who understand the charter issue, like how charters game their numbers, is that this is a situation ripe for corruption and gaming. And what they want to do with their deals is they want to screen, and they can do that because they've got all the data, the people who have the most growth potential. Because if you're a very person in very bad straits and you don't have a lot of upward potential, you're not going to be very attractive for as an investment because you're not going to get the movement that they need. And if you're a person who is like a little messed up, but not that bad, you're not that bad, you might improve a little bit, that's not attractive. You want to find the person who is like reasonably traumatized but super gritty and is just going to bounce back. And that's the grit thing. Like, that's the grit and resilience. They want to screen for grit and resilience because that's the money people. Those are the people, and that's who they need to screen for. America Forward and Results for America, so they were lobbying for Pay for Success here. And I'm sorry that it's hard to read, and I'm going to send the slide deck around if you, as long as you sign in with your email. But they are a spinoff of New Profit, which is a social entrepreneurship organization. And this is talking about the need for high impact educational tech to do this work, to do this Pay for Success work. That's what they need. The data has to be in a big lake for it to work. Because if the data is in a silo, you can't pretend by giving you Goldman Sachs online Waterford Upstart pre-K, we kept you from being incarcerated if the juvenile delinquency data lives over here in a bucket and your pre-K data lives over here in a bucket and they don't touch. Because I'm not saying it's legit that they could even justify it if it was all in a big bucket together, but if it's not even in the big bucket, they can't even make pretend that it's going to work, that it's legitimate.
And that's the blockchain?
Well, this is the interoperable databases, yeah. And I think that ultimately will hang with digital identity. But right now it's showing up in Project Unicorn is a proponent of getting this interoperable data. And this is not, so right now it's interoperable data of all these different online systems, and getting it all into your dashboards. They even need, it's ridiculous, kindergartners, and they're saying, oh, well, we can't do the online learning because it takes like an hour for them to all log in, and by that time the computers have gone to sleep and it's time to do the next thing. Well, our answer is a QR code. But they get to put stickers on it, so it makes it really friendly. And that's their answer to this interoperable data system. So this is the Amplify quote, for those of you who are particular, but this is where they explicitly say social impact bonds from Amplify. They have tremendous opportunity to pull capital resources and deliver significant gains. And they want to, but they need to figure out how to control for implementing and measuring success. So this is 2014. So, clearly they have a lot invested in having a pilot district that they can figure out to say, like, boom, we got it. Like, you know how to measure that success. And, where are the deals? We're going to scale this thing across the country. The other piece that's really hard about this is the conversation around equity and opportunity gaps and these things that is really complicated because I think they've been very successful in framing ed tech as this digital divide. We need, and there are different opportunity accesses. And I think if you understand ed tech is essentially a human capital market and surveillance technology, like, are we all trying for equitable access to surveillance? Like, maybe the folks who aren't, are off the system, it's sort of like, well, facial recognition technology works really badly on black and brown faces. I don't think that's I don't think we want to work towards making it really good for everybody. Like, maybe the question should be, do we want this thing? Because maybe this thing isn't the thing we want. And it's a hard conversation to have because I think in many respects districts that are systematically underfunded, when they come and provide material resources that look like tech, that feels like you see me and you value me, and this is what we need. And I think that we need to start talking about this tech in different ways so that people can have a broader understanding of how it's being used and how they want to participate in it. I wrote a blog piece, Ibram Kendi did, and he has a lot of books, very, very, wonderful scholar about racism and anti-racism work. But he is also presenting to Unbound Ed, which is an open education resource conference that is aligned to Common Core state standards. And this conference was funded largely by Gates. And so I tried to engage to say, do we think that we're going to digitally engineer, equity? Or do we think, given what we know about how the world works and who's in power, that is going to be something that's going to serve Black and brown students? I have my thoughts on that, and I haven't heard back, but I think it's important to understand the ways in which, is equity equal access to the best online teacher? And that's, I think, what INACOL would like for us to ask for. So these are just a few. This is a document from 2013 from my state of Pennsylvania about Pay for Success applications. Home visits, we're hearing lots and lots about home visits. I know that's a big thing in Washington. Universal pre-K, again, think amply. Supportive housing, again, Project Welcome Home. Job readiness, again, skills-based. And these cost offsets for this are, again, underemployment, incarceration, chronic illness, mental illness. That's the things that they're putting numbers to generate the profits. Data Zone is the model. So Data Zone is tied to the San Jose School District, but now it's multiple districts around, and it was started with the NSF money, and it was scaled by Chan Zuckerberg. So it's Facebook money. The interesting thing about Chan Zuckerberg is it's healthcare and education. Okay, so it's these two sectors coming together. The pre-K program longitudinal database in California, the guy who developed it is called iPinwheel. His prior employment for 7 years before that was developing case management software for the FBI. Okay, so just for context of how this works. The Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust was embedded under Data Zone, even though it has bigger breadth, and it's tying together, you can see here, public health data, child and family service data, mental health data, juvenile justice data, ed tech, and ed tech. And this is in Santa Clara and San Mateo in the Bay Area. So this is the data lake. These are all the things that need to live with the pre-K data to generate the cost offset.
How are unions reacting to all this? How's the teachers union reacting?
I haven't gotten a whole lot of, I haven't gotten a whole lot of response yet. You guys have to share it out for me, okay? The National Interoperability Collaborative is even scarier. Okay, so the National Interoperability Collaborative wants to scale the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust, and the woman who's with Data Zone is partnered with them, and they're connected to Johns Hopkins. And so that is the piece that also connects Medicaid and all this other stuff. So, and there's a lot of military stuff with this. So this interoperable data system, again, it's incipient, but people don't know. So Data Zone, SVRDT, and National Interoperability Collaborative are all connected. And the other piece, there's a book by Elizabeth Hinton that I have not yet read, but I'm really interested in, is talking about how since Great Society, the social welfare state has actually aided and abetted the prison pipeline for Black men through social services and through public housing systems and the policing systems that are layered into that. That on the surface may seem progressive, but foundationally we're not. And so she documents it, and I have not yet read it. I want to read it because it very much aligns with what I'm seeing, because there are people, it's the LEAA, and I can't remember the acronym, but it's a policing entity that is tied in with housing, and this is Housing HUD and urban development and public housing projects. There is someone with that tied in with, it's called Stewards of Change, with National Interoperability Collaborative. And so I'm really concerned when you see things like Palantir being tied in with housing. And in Philadelphia, we have a big HUD project that involves big picture learning, how these systems are being layered in and profiling. The data labs, there's 6 big data labs that are pulling this data and modeling. One is WSIPP in Washington. There's one in Brown. There's one at Penn. There's one in the UK. There's one in California. And I think University of Chicago is the other one. So these are under the New York, NYU has a GovLab initiative.
I'm sorry, are these governmental or these are?
So these are based in higher ed, but they're channeling public money. They're channeling a lot of public money. So we have the Action intelligence for social policy at Penn. And so they're running a lot of the pay for success data. And they're tied, when you look at this closer, this is my little SysMap, but it links into the social impact bonds that they're affiliated with.
We have room for 15 more minutes.
Oh, okay, all right. So, okay, Patty Murray, architect of pay for ESSA, pay for success. Paul Ryan with Patty Murray on evidence-based policymaking, getting the data. He now just launched a nonprofit, to anti-poverty nonprofit, so he's setting this up. Evidence-based policymaking, Paul Ryan, they passed it in 2018, so that opened the floodgates. All of this movement now is tied, pay for success is tied to evidence-based policymaking. Here's me looking at what policy wants and trying to tell the Goldman Sachs lady, please don't put little pre-K children on a surveillance play table, it's a bad plan. You all know it. And they're just like, could this woman please go away? I came with my little half sheet going like, please, here's a picture, like this is what you're doing. And they don't want to know. But, so Tom Ridge, our former governor, first Homeland Security, has a public-private partnership setting up. Their 4 sectors are IT, real estate, education, and sustainability. So both education and the UN SDGs, they have, I have a blog post about it. Our former superintendent was on their education advisory committee. So they have 12 former governors bipartisan. So 2 of them are from Washington. They're looking at personalized learning with the aligned financial incentives. So this is all linked in, but there's also very high-level state surveillance and military on their advisory council with IT. Behavioral biometrics, we talked about that a little bit. Social emotional data, scary trait map, very gritty, not very coachable. This is this kind of shit that they want to put together, sorry. Heckman equation, so more on the Heckman equation, this is the money quote. Even we think we can't boost IQ because that's too stable. The distribution is established, as they were saying, by 8, 9, or 10. The character skills are more, I think he said manipulable, but malleable, in the sense that they are actually our target of opportunity. So this is like from this talk that they gave. He's like, that's our target, is that because we can manipulate that. This is a guy, this is a really good clip. He's in Heckman's oak paneled room at Chicago. They have all these social emotional learning people, and he's saying, well, as a former school superintendent of Chicago suburban schools, I would never talk about like tracking your kids' neuroticism because they're tracking these big 5 traits. But I come up with another name for it because we don't want to pack the school board building. So these are the things that they say in oak panel rooms, but they don't realize that the University of Chicago put up on their website. You can watch it. This is the things that they say. So this is the Heckman guy. And this guy is connected with Otis, and they're part of NWEA, which is doing the new testing, map testing, with social emotional data. Daniel Tiger's Tea Party. It's not good. PBS is working with the military on behavior stuff. So just talking about University of Washington, there's a lot of military contracting with gaming systems locally. So there's a lot of military stuff with video games. Again, Institute for Brain Learning at UW, Susie Levine, the Career Pathways Employment lady, was a co-founder of that. So when you're talking about the nodes on the head, I'm assuming it's maybe something like that, maybe not in a machine, I don't know. And so this is the big roadmap project, getting cell data. Also math data. It's important to know that math is a social impact bond initiative. This is from Texas, this guy. He was just hired last year to be their social impact bond and math innovation czar guy. So now that makes more sense. Community schools, real quick. Medicaid in schools. It's really scary when you talk about that FERPA is now replacing HIPAA for that. There's a lot of bad potential. We're platforming social care, not just the teaching. This is a robot with handwriting skills. We're talking about teletherapy. They're even talking about like OT and PT through teletherapy systems, which is wild to even think about. And then we're talking about elder care. Like these are the things that this was in the New York Times, that little emoticon cat is run by someone in the Philippines, and they watch the elderly person in their house and like sprinkle them with hearts and things occasionally and engage with them through this digital device. But it's platforming social care and creating as an impact opportunity, because there actually are end-of-life care social impact bonds in the UK, which is very far ahead on this. But where they have these social robots in Japan, like go kids, like they're kicking the butt of the social robots. And there's like a research paper saying like abuse of the social robots. So there's hope, y'all. We just need to look to the children in Japan. So these are different. This is an infographic about impact. Prenatal, so this is the home visits. Early childhood, food, housing, early literacy, character training, workforce training, health, behavior, addiction, jobs. In the community schools, They want to securitize all that. So just beware, because the United Way is part of this. They want the FERPA waivers. They're coordinating the social impact bonds, and they're doing it. And here's like where they actually say, we want to frame community needs as investment products. And that's what this is about. That's what Pay for Success is about. Community in Schools is working with United Way, and this is their long-range plan from 2018 to 2022, where they say they want to work on pay for performance and pay for success. And Ballmer Group, you can see Chan Zuckerberg, Gates, many impact investors are funding communities in schools. Bank of America. Steve Ballmer, his wife, is on the board of Strive, and Strive is one of the main factors behind human capital pipelines. So again, we're talking about AI, signals intelligence. What does it mean when an AI and you admit you're housing insecure in your community school and they put you on some pathway? Is someone going to take your kids? We know that they're consolidating the family welfare data here in Washington State. They want to put in the judicial involvement because they need that for the cost offset, so that's coming online. We know that Bezos is pouring money into housing services and pre-K. And even with the Montessori model, we know that they want to put the sensors in the slippers of the little kids. So what is that pre-K going to actually look like? But we really need to understand Amazon Web Services in terms of its role within collecting data for the CIA, that Palantir for the Welcome Home SIB was running their data through Amazon Web Services, that these things are all interconnected. The Roadmap project is part of Strive. Strive Network. Strive was a spin-out of KnowledgeWorks in Cincinnati. So KnowledgeWorks is doing the learning ecosystems with the badges and the digital tutors. Procter & Gamble, my dad worked for Procter & Gamble, advised on this because they're masters of supply chain management. A Procter & Gamble executive created Internet of Things and went off with MIT to scale that. So Strive spun out. Strive, Cincinnati is the model of community schools. Like our mayor, people were taken to Cincinnati to get the big dog and pony show about community schools. The United Way of Cincinnati is part of this, and Strive. And now the United Way has something called the ALICE Poverty Management Program. They don't call it poverty management, but it stands for Assets Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. Meaning you're poor, you're the working poor. So the working poor are the raw material for their collective impact, but not to necessarily get them off of it, because we know that they're planning on no jobs. So again, United Way, they're not the good guys. Home visit legislation, just talking about Inslee again. Omedyar has an app where they're tracking behavioral compliance for Medicaid moms in South Carolina. And I was actually, like, if people think this is far-fetched, was contacted by the state treasurer of South Carolina, a white Republican guy who was fighting Pay for Success finance in his state. And he was really appreciating this information. And he was like, thank you for telling me about racial capitalism. Like, I didn't know. And I'm like, yeah, this is what we're fighting. We're fighting this thing. And they're the epicenter. South Carolina is the model state for the maternal home visits and the behavior apps. So, like, this is a bipartisan thing. So Strive is funding it. You can kind of see normal characters of who wants the human capital pipeline. If you're putting little kids on the pre-K pipeline, you need a surveillance play table with a fisheye lens to track their social behaviors and put them on rubrics, because you need to know where they stand so you can manage their growth. I know that you guys got social impact bonds sort of considered several years ago, and I kind of think it went quiet because they can't figure out, they're too complicated to scale, but they're working on these contracts. And then, so these folks, this is the money slide on the securitization. This is the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, working with Ready Nation on pre-K workforce-aligned programs that they were talking about social impact bonds being aggregated in asset-backed securities. So this is the one place that I have seen where they specifically admit their plan to securitize the debt behind the pre-K program. Last year they had a business people only event in New York City where they rang the NASDAQ bell, and this was on Times Square. Job, workforce development, and pre-K finance. So many private sector leaders there. They specifically said on the invitation, if you are a pre-K advocate, you could only come with the permission of 4 approved business people.
Oh my gosh.
And this is global. So, this is Lumina money. So Lumina, which is student debt, has given Jobs for the Future, which is setting up the workforce stuff, $20 million. Lumina, Robinhood, Paul Tudor Jones, the Cotton Futures guy, and Salesforce are partnering a strategic alliance in human capital. This is Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi, like, signing up on their evidence-based policies, because, like, they're getting people on the human capital pipeline. Results for America specifically talks about lobbying for the ESSA. And Pay for Success, the first Pay for Success grant There were two. One was for ELL. The second was for human capital development, and it ran through Jobs for the Future in Massachusetts, and I'm not sure the second place. So this is, again, talking about pre-K blockchain identity. This, I know it's hard to see, but when I send it around, the state of California NAACP actually passed a resolution in the spring opposing linkage of blockchain identity to public benefit systems. Yay! So that was like my first, and then it went on to the national meeting in a slightly revised form, and it passed at the national level, and we're still waiting on our ability to say that publicly. But it did pass, and it was actually EdTech tried to gut that bill, and it was fought back. So this Moneyball government pathway, Bain and Company, we're putting people on the pathway, but whose pathway? This model, Susie Levine, former Microsoft. The thing that you need to know about the Swiss model, Switzerland is blockchain. And it's the United Nations, and it's CERN where they invented the internet, and it's secret bank accounts, and it's a lot of things in Switzerland, and chocolate, right? So gig jobs, this is from the innovation plan for my state. They say gig economy is the growing sector. In Pennsylvania, they're saying that high growth jobs, of all the high growth jobs, there are two that pay a decent wage, $33 and $57, the managers and the accountants. The rest are under 15, okay? Low wage work, gig work. Jobs for the Future, that's running this Pay for Success initiative, took $121 million so far from the Gates Foundation. So the Washington plan from 2016 essentially has said contingent workforce, 40%, lowered cost of tech startups, so that's to code the virtual world, and that most jobs will require no education after high school.
Where'd you find that?
This is the Washington State Workforce Plan from 2016.
All you have to do is watch their committee meetings, blow your mind.
So IBM is saying, like, we want to groom our people. We have AI. We're putting little kids on that. The problem is we need people with the proper social skills. So their problems are work habits, problem solving, communication, adaptability, customer service, and accept supervision. They don't really care how you read or write. They just want you to behave. And understanding IBM and the Hollerith cards and the Holocaust. So again, only a few people are going to get a full, diverse education. Most people are going to get limited education, and when they're used up, they're going to be put through the ringer in terms of behavior. The Pay for Success will be getting the digital badge, not getting paid employment. And that's what you have to understand. Their game will just to be jump the hoop, jump the hoop, jump the hoop, get the badge, get the badge, get the badge. And we'll get paid every time you get the badge, but you'll never necessarily get work that will let you support your family.
Wow.
Competency-based education is key, and that's y'all are moving on that this time. So more on that. The badges going in the learning locker. This is a blockchain video that talks about anyone can grant an EduBlock and be a teacher. So this is a park. Where is this park, Susan?
Oh, in Kirkland.
Kirkland, Google Park. So we're talking about beacons and collecting competencies and skills through your public park spaces. There is a blockchain credential. Southern New Hampshire University piloted it. It's an mostly online degree program. Paul LeBlanc is with Ridge Lane. He's close affiliated with Michael Crow at Arizona State. So this is happening through MIT Learning Machine. So the proof of concept is already out there. This is the behavioral data capture through the wearable tech. It's very chilling, though. They're talking about biometrics, eye focus, task completion, motion sensors, all of this stuff. And this is a defense contractor, folks. Open education resources, that's what you're interacting with. Big picture, I know is in some of the districts around here. It's the first social impact bond for education in the United Kingdom. It integrates, Salesforce did an app to track social competencies through their app. They want to integrate it with LinkedIn. Again, Microsoft owns that. InBlaze was paid for by Ted Dintersmith, a venture capitalist. They want to push as much learning out into the world as possible to lower deprofessionalized teaching. And they want to screen their workforce, and they want to know who's the good worker, right? And they want to capture it on the app. And then all of that data is something that Lumina and Robinhood and Salesforce will be betting on through their social impact bonds. And of course, Salesforce is now working with Alibaba, which is Jack Ma and social credit scoring. They're working with ICE. They're working on impact investing. So there's a lot of stuff. They're working on social service dashboards. And the idea is eventually, for even those of you who are like, we'll just homeschool, is if you get a digital voucher on blockchain that's tied into the system, your library, your community arts center, your sports center, everything that will take the voucher will be aligned to the standards and will give the data, because it will have to as a condition of accepting the money. So this idea of even the homeschooled and unschooled folks will be sucked in unless you create a whole parallel universe that doesn't take the voucher money. That's like totally, but then what happens because you have no badges? So that's all working. The OECD, this is like, it's big. Mark Tucker, there's an Australian guy who took over from Mark Tucker, now big picture. I think that's the template for global human capital impact bonds. Yeah, they're theorizing digital vouchers. Arizona has ESA debit cards. Nick Szabo, who was the guy who theorized early cryptocurrency, he got his bachelor's at University of Washington, very interesting, went to GW, and then poosh, Satoshi Nakamoto and blockchain. We don't know where that came from. And digital benefit systems, so yeah, so I guess we have to leave. But they want to put Snap and Codu. Oh, and this is the last thing, okay. Oh no, okay, we talked about this a lot. In closing, okay, our lives, predictive analytics. They're starting to run our lives. It's like the Nosedive episode on Black Mirror. So that's gonna start limiting choices. And again, we have to understand this. Once again, reinforcing targeted communities, Black and brown communities, poor communities will be on the front lines of this, right? That the future of work, it's uncertain. All the people in charge who are uncertain, why they think we put you on a pathway, self-entrepreneurship, and pay for success. So thanks, guys. All right.